Hey friends, it's Jasmine. I hope you all are doing well. I wanted to just kind of air some things out and just kind of talk about some things that have been going on in our, specifically the local Indianapolis pagan community. And this video is not at all intended to like slander anyone specifically, but just to really address some issues and some concerns within the community. There is a lot of things that are taking place and a lot of people who are taking action when maybe they should be reflecting more and not reacting. And there are other people who are, they're not taking action when probably they really need to be. I think that the wider pagan community has gone through multiple shifts and multiple changes. And in a way, I feel like for the betterment of the community, because in order for our community to evolve, things need to change. And behaviors and patterns have to shift. In order for our community to continue to grow and to evolve. Our community, like I said, has gone through a lot of shifts, a lot of changes, and in my opinion, has very much needed to, okay? It's very much needed. And these new changes, these new Plutonian influences, especially with the Plutonian generation of Scorpio, there are a lot of things that is being brought to the table and a lot of theories and philosophies and ideas that are being questioned and kind of being put through the test of faith, if you will. And there's a lot of things that I feel like our community, specifically here in Indianapolis, has supported and has endorsed when maybe we shouldn't have. And I think that there's been a lot of people who have just co-signed on things without really looking into it much themselves or really thinking for themselves, and instead just kind of following, this crowd that essentially just tries to make laws or rules for the wider community. And the reason why I think that this can be so harmful for our local Indianapolis community is because it is extremely, extremely difficult, I feel, to have one person in a place of representation for the wider pagan community, because there are so many different pagan and occult faiths and paths. And like, there isn't just one, right? Like, all of our paths are unique to our experiences, and there are people who follow certain traditions or certain paths, but there are just as many people, if not more, who do not. So trying to have one person to really kind of be a spokesman or spokeswoman or spokesperson is almost impossible. Do I think it's completely impossible? No, but I do think that to have someone in that position would require someone who is open-minded and has people skills, especially if they're going to be communicating with people outside of our community and also dealing with internal affairs. So this also brings in someone who would need to have problem solving and solution creating skills, as well as just overall people skills and knowing how to, properly and diplomatically have a conversation about potentially sensitive issues. And I'm trying to think of how I can best say this. There's a lot of people in the wider pagan community. This is not at all just an Indianapolis issue, but just in the wider pagan community. There's a lot of people who want titles. There's a lot of people who want just outright recognition or praise. And there's a lot of people who want basically to, in my opinion, there's people out there who want to just be a cult leader. Not a cult, but want to be a cult leader. There are like any other community, there are plenty of toxic, dangerous, narcissistic, problematic people out there who seek to take advantage of other people. And our community, the wider pagan community, and specifically the Indianapolis community, is of course not exempt to that, because that is something that is very much just a part of our species, unfortunately. What I have a hard time with is seeing people in places of power that they have done absolutely nothing to earn, and they just kind of take it upon themselves. That's a problem. To claim something that you have not earned whatsoever, and specifically talking about leadership within the community. Taking on these titles and these names and these roles that you really can't fulfill, or you really don't know anything that actually, goes into that. Like I said, I think qualities of a good leader would be someone who can be diplomatic, and someone who has people skills, someone who can create solutions and can have conversations about sensitive matters in a respectful way. Also, someone who's open-minded and someone who's educated and is willing to continuously educate themselves, not just about paganism, but about affairs within the specific Indianapolis community, as well as affairs in the wider pagan community. Someone who, is up to date on issues and matters, and also someone who knows how to network and will actually communicate with the community and speak with other communal leaderships and have that outreach and have that dialogue. And I don't feel like we've had a lot of that in our local pagan community. And I think some of that is because I think that the Indianapolis pagan community tends to be very, I don't know what the right word is for this, but more internal in a way. I feel like for the most part, there's not a whole lot of outside of our community outreach and education that really takes place. And, a lot of people tend to stick either completely within their own solitary practices, which is totally fine. And I'm not bashing anyone for being solitary. I've been solitary for a long time, and I still have a solitary practice, even though I am in a coven. However, there's a lot of solitary practitioners who just want to stay solitary, and that's completely fine and valid, okay? Then you also have a lot of different covens, groves, kindreds, groups, whatever, and they, for the most part, tend to kind of stick to their own groups. So there's not a whole lot of cross coven or cross group events and affairs that actually happen. And so sometimes when there are issues that are taking place in our community, or there are conversations that need to be had in our community, the conversation starts and stops specifically just within the group that is having that dialogue. So what I'm trying to say is here that our community is kind of this hodgepodge, modge podge, raggle taggle ramble of different sorts of people and traditions and groups that are all just kind of stuck together under this large umbrella of the pagan community or the witchy community. But truthfully, trying to really get something across the board through multiple different groups and multiple different beliefs is very, very difficult, because like I've said before in other videos, you could really put 10 or 15 pagans or witches in a room, and you're probably going to get about 50 different opinions. That being said, you could trying to also manage a collective is, especially if it comes to trying to kind of manage a group of witches or manage a group of pagans, it gets tricky when there's multiple different groups and multiple different belief systems and solitary practitioners and coven members and high priests and high priestesses and this and that, because it eventually turns into a bit like trying to herd cats, which is a very popular phrase to describe pagan management, if you will. And this is something that I don't see as much within other faiths, because there is so much more unity and collective understanding of their spiritual paths. That being said, I don't think that individuals are understanding their spiritual paths, but I think that there's a lack of understanding from practitioners to practitioners to practitioners. So if we are going to have a rep, so to speak, someone who represents the community in external affairs, I think that that person needs to be educated, needs to have an open mind, and needs to be able to communicate and talk and learn. And they should be in a place of trying to understand other faiths within the craft and paganism, other belief styles that may or may not match their own, but if they are going to be a representative, they need to be able to properly represent these various different collectives without necessarily being biased, which is very tricky and hard to do. I think that there are some major issues within the craft as a whole and paganism, and especially in our local community, that also need to be addressed. Like I said, we've gone through many shifts and many changes, and a lot of it is for the better, in my opinion. But there are some key topics here that I think really need to be addressed and really need to be looked at. Number one, I think for me would be inclusion. As Western occultism, witchcraft, and neo-paganism has evolved in the States and even just in Indianapolis, we've seen a lot of these shifts in ideologies and behaviors. And I think as a whole, our community is becoming more inclusive. But I think that there's still plenty of work that can be done. When I am talking about inclusion, I am talking about really representing and honoring, the men in these communities as well. I think there is very much this notion that our community is very female dominated, and it very much can be. But there are men in our community, and there is masculine energy in our community as well. And I think that should be something that is recognized. And I think that is something that should be celebrated. And I talked about some of these issues regarding men and the craft actually on the podcast as the Cauldron Bubbles. But I think that's something that just needs a little bit more attention across the board, and making sure that we are having that representation there. Also, in terms of people in our community who are LGBT, it should not ever be an issue where, can this person be a part of this community because they are LGBT? I don't even know why this is still even an issue. It makes me sick to my stomach that there are people out there who are incredibly homophobic and transphobic still going on. And not only are they having these ideas, but they're publicly sharing these ideas in pagan and occult and witchy groups online, and also propagating these ideas and creating a platform for these ideas online as well. And that is something that I will not tolerate. Going in line with the same kind of train of thought as that, there's also the lack of celebration and inclusion of our witches of color, of our pagans of color. A lot of times when these individuals say their piece and come to the community about issues regarding people of color, oftentimes their voices are not heard, oftentimes they are overlooked, they are spoken over, and I have seen this time and again. And I think, for me, my personal view of paganism and the craft and this community is that we are a community that welcomes and celebrates diversity no matter what, okay? I think diversity is innately a part of the craft, and inclusion should not even be a hot topic. We should not even be having to have this kind of controversial energy around celebrating and honoring our witches of color and our LGBTQ community members, period. There's nothing else that I can say about that. I don't know how to lay this out any other way. And it's really upsetting to me that this is still such an issue, and that I have seen people myself and have addressed it and have called it out when I've seen it, when these injustices are taking place within our very own community. It makes my blood boil. It makes me sick, because to me, that is not the behavior of a real witch. To me, that is not supported in any way in paganism. And if you believe that it is, I would love to see some historical pagan religious texts that support this. An example being, in a Kemetic pagan group that I am in, there is postings essentially promoting the idea that gay men and trans women are pedophiles. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Are you literally kidding? And so I posted in the group, I said, I would love to see a cartouche that supports this. I would love to see some Kemetic text or writings that condemns this. Because I know that there are plenty of queer, gay, trans people throughout history who have been ignored, who have been misrepresented, like these pharaohs being buried with their best friend. Give me a break. Give me a break. Look, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, all of that. This is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. And this is something that has been an innate part of pagan cultures and worlds, stretching back since the beginning. This does not need to be controversial. This does not need to be scary. This does not need to be, where we create divisions in our community of who's accepting and who's not. Our community the default should be that we are accepting. The default should be that we, take a stand for everybody, period. And like I said, those are issues that I'm not really willing to compromise on. So when I see people out in our community who are trying to speak for our community and represent our community, but they actively work against these groups of people, it's unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable to me. You cannot represent our community without representing everyone in our community. And if you do not feel like you can actively do that, then you're not the one to be the representative for our community. And if me saying, I don't think you're a good fit, I don't think you're qualified, if that upsets you, good. I hope it does. I hope you're upset, because you aren't qualified. And in no way, shape of the word would you ever be qualified. As a representative of our community, you need to be able to unapologetically take a stand for everyone in our community, even people that you disagree with, okay? But like I said, you need to have an open mind. You need to be tolerant and accepting. You need to be a voice for the voiceless. You need to be willing to educate yourself and get out of your comfort zone. You need to have networking skills. You do. You need to have networking skills. You need to be diplomatic. You need to be respectful. You need to be an ally to people within our community. Don't think that you're going to represent this community when you are actively spreading this foolishness, this hatred, and this bigotry, because it will not be tolerated. And going back to this generation of Scorpio, okay? And I'm not talking about our sun signs, our moon signs. I'm talking about the Plutonian influence within a natal chart, as these external planets very much rule more generations of people than they do individuals, okay? You can look at you can look at what house Pluto is in to see where this is going to affect you personally. But in terms of the zodiac and the position of Pluto within the Kyklos, that is talking about an astrological generation. Right now, we have this astrological generation of Scorpio, which is a younger crowd overall that is really rising up within the community and really kind of taking a stand and saying, no, we don't support that. No, that is intolerant and hateful. No, that's racist. That's homophobic. That's transphobic. That's problematic. We don't support that. We don't endorse that. We're not doing that. And some of the individuals who claim an elder title just because they might be 65, 75 years old, but yet they've done absolutely no work in the community, and maybe they just came to the craft 5 years ago, but because they're 65 plus, they think that that makes them an elder, which I totally disagree. Have different views, you know, oh, they come from a different time, or oh this, or oh that. No, we're not tolerating that anymore, and we're not accepting that anymore. And, you know, it's time that you learn to educate yourself, and be more tolerant and be more of an ally, because this gatekeeping of who can be in the craft and who can be in paganism, we're throwing that in the trash. We're done with that. So that's kind of been my 2 cents of some of the stuff that is going on in our community. I just wanted to come on here. You know, I don't want this to be necessarily just a pointless drama video, because I really do want to address these issues. And I want to make it very clear where I stand as well on these issues. So, you know, I might make another video talking more about this moving forward. There's going to be a lot of changes taking place in our local community, and I'm definitely kind of keeping my eye on the community and keeping my eye on how all of this transpires. So maybe I'll do an update later. But yeah, until next time, guys, blessed be.